from the media and the Tories, but from elements, quite influential elements, within his own party. They're now hoping to ride the surf on this wave, if you like, and hope that nobody gets in on the act, effectively, that nobody actually sees how inept Theresa May really is, or actually gets a glimpse of the real Tory programme. As far as I'm aware, and people can correct me in the discussion, but as far as I'm aware, the Tory programme is basically strong and stable leadership. Those are the policies they're going to put into place. They're going to have strong leadership, they're going to have stable leadership, so that they can then conduct negotiations to achieve this Brexit where we leave the single market but also get an even better deal than the single market. Sounds fantastic. And she cannot be questioned on that because there's nothing beyond that. This presumably is why she's refusing to debate with anybody else. Personally, I think that's absolutely scandalous. I mean, I'll declare a prior interest. As a Marxist, I've never had a huge amount of faith in the kind of impartiality and openness of bourgeois democracy. But this is poor even by its own standards. In America, you had several debates. In France, you've had several debates. But in Britain, the sitting Prime Minister, who is hoping for a three-figure majority and may well get it, isn't prepared to debate with other candidates. And again, you can correct me if you disagree on this, but I feel that the treatment of this scandal by the media has been a bit soft, to be honest. Surely they should be making a big deal about this. And yet they're not. And I think the reason they're not is because they too are a bit worried about what would happen if they were to put her on the spot. I think she'd crumble. Now instead, what we've got is can't call it a debate, I don't know what you call it, a dual interview, where the two main candidates, Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, are going to be interviewed and asked questions separately. We'll see how that goes. That could still go wrong for her. But you can see, I would say, the establishment putting up barriers, trying to protect their candidate that they're rallying behind, even if they don't necessarily agree with everything she says, in the hope that the national interests, the interests of British capitalism, can overall be safeguarded. And has to be said that part of this campaign, as I've already mentioned, it's not just confined to the media and the various state institutions. There is a section of the Labour Party that's playing the same role. I would say there's a section of the Labour Party which is consciously playing this role. The so-called Blairites. Now, I appreciate that the anatomy of the Labour Party is a bit more complex than just Corbynistas and Blairites. But there is, I would hope that we can all agree, there is a core of right-wing MPs who consider the eviction of Corbyn from the leadership of the Labour Party to be the most important goal, even including during a general election. I would say in support of this claim that I've seen videos, I've seen a video of John Woodcock MP saying, don't worry guys, Corbyn's not going to be the Prime Minister, but just for the record, I think he is too dangerous to be a Prime Minister. This is a Labour candidate in an election. Now, less scandalous than that, there are also plenty of MPs who, I'm told, are campaigning on a purely kind of local, on their own personal basis, if you know what I mean by that. So they're going up saying, I'm a good constituency MP, I'll show your views are represented. Basically not campaigning on the policy points that Corbyn has put forward. And I would imagine there's probably quite a few Labour MPs, right-wing Labour MPs, that aren't going to campaign on the manifesto that's just been leaked, in any form. Instead, they're just going to campaign on, ignore him, it's all about us. However, if it all goes the wrong way, well, I was going to use a different expression, but if it all goes the wrong way and Labour loses very, very badly, of course it will all be Corbyn's fault. He was poisoned on the doorstep, so on and so forth. And the media will parrot that with glee. This is something I think we have to be alive to. It's a very important aspect of this for us as people who want to see the end of a Tory government. I believe that a Corbyn victory is the only way to secure that at this stage. And so, to move on to the kind of the most pressing question of, well, how is that even possible? How can we make this happen? It's worth first looking at what the lie of the land is so far. So we've had the local elections, and what we saw in those was it was a bad day for Labour, and we saw the Tories picking up many, many council seats, especially from UKIP. Basically, UKIP lost all of its seats but one. It actually managed to win one in Lancashire from Labour, unfortunately. But it went down from about 145 to one council seat, and almost all of that was going to the Conservative Party. Now, this gives us an impression of the kind of trajectory that we're seeing, that now in many cases, this will be former Tory party activists or former Tory voters to the right, even of that party, who moved towards UKIP, who are now coming home. But we also have to be alive to the fact, we shouldn't be complacent about this, we need to be alive to the fact that in certain areas, particularly in Labour's northern heartlands, as they call them, there will be people who move from Labour to UKIP who are now considering voting Tory for a number of reasons. One, of course, is the question of Brexit, and perhaps the manifesto pledge that basically the Labour Party accepts and acknowledges Brexit may help. But other parts of it are, first of all, the media campaign to make Corbyn out like he is basically a dangerous enemy of the state. I would imagine that's affected the way people think about it. But also there's an element of conscious cover-up, really, of Corbyn's message. I saw one statistic that claimed that only 7% of people had heard his slogan, for the many, not the few. 7%. That's clearly not enough to be penetrating into the minds of the electorate. But that gives us, I would say, also a glimmer of hope. That the more people, I would argue that the more people who actually hear what Corbyn has to say and hear what policies he's putting forward, the more people are going to be considering voting for him. As long as the media and the Blairites maintain this chorus in perfect harmony of saying he's unelectable, people don't like him, people think he's dangerous, then that almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more his policies, which the BBC, Laura Kongsberg's article out today, said that many of the points, most of the points in the manifesto, are popular and have polled well consistently. So the more those ideas are getting out to the public, and the kind of the real Jeremy Corbyn, if you like, then the more we can expect to swing towards Labour. We shouldn't be deliriously expecting that it's going to be like an immense swing and that you're going to have a huge Labour majority. We do have to be realistic about this. But the predictions of a Labour landslide, I think, have been put forward so forcefully in order to make that a reality. And there's a certain amount of hoping for that to become a reality.
Tory landslide.
A Tory landslide, what did I say? Did I say Labour? Sorry. My mistake. I think we can see this, or the potential for this, within the polling. So already, we've seen that the last figure I saw, and again, if there are more recent figures, please do jump in with them. But the last figures I saw showed a Tory majority of, I think it was either 14 or 16 points. It depends where you look. Now that is very large, and the Tory proportion was about 44 points. One I saw had 46. But before, it was up at 48, which means the trajectory for the Tories at this point has been downward, and the trajectory for Labour at this point has been upward. It's interesting that what's happened in the meantime is Theresa May has been basically running away from journalists. There was one BBC reporter who could only just manage a picture of her head above a hedgerow as she went diving away from him. He wasn't even allowed to cross the road in order to get a better picture of her. Whilst that's been going on, Corbyn has been campaigning, and the Corbyn movement is beginning to get mobilised, and we've seen more policy ideas coming out. I'm very interested to see what the polling figures are like next week, or the next time they do, after this leak. I would hope that it would reflect an increase in the proportion of Labour votes or intended votes. We'll have to see how that goes. But if that's the case, I think that should give us hope. Hope that if we get involved, if we campaign vocally for Jeremy Corbyn's ideas, but I mean, more importantly, and I'll go into more detail on this, for a bold, a revolutionary programme, a big overturn, a great overturn in the way that politics and society is currently run, then actually there could be a very big upset in this election. At the very least, this massive majority that the Tories are looking for could be thwarted. And a big disappointment for the Tories here means that the kind of instability that I'm sure we're all predicting for the next couple of years is still very much on the cards. I'd say that instability is still there, but of course the Tories are going to be much less well equipped to be able to deal with it if they don't have a three-figure majority. So first of all, being more vocal and getting the ideas out there alone, I would say, can make a dent in the Tory majority. But there's more to it than that, and I think we can learn lessons from abroad in this respect. I would say that the kind of phenomena we're seeing in Britain, with the anti-establishment feeling, the move towards different forms of nationalism and chauvinism in great swathes of the population in different forms, and the general kind of rage that we are seeing in politics in Britain are certainly not unique phenomena. We can see them in the United States surrounding their election, and we can see them in France as well. And in both of those elections, we can also see them in other countries, but to concentrate there, in both of those elections, yes, we did see right-wing populism and nationalism gaining a much bigger echo than it had before. But we also saw left-wing candidates gaining a much, much bigger echo than they had done before. Bernie Sanders is, of course, a standout example of this. Now, Bernie Sanders' programme is, if anything, to the right of Corbyn's in the Leave manifesto, particularly on foreign policy. But in terms of the spectrum of American politics, he was far, far to the left. And he was coming out calling for a political revolution against the billionaire class. In America, he was talking openly about revolution. Now, of course, his idea of what a revolution should look like, I imagine, would be different to ours. But he was using this language, and it connected. It connected particularly with the youth, but it also connected with a large layer of American society that felt completely left behind, disenfranchised, and alienated from politics, and I would say from capitalism. They may not express it like that, although many of them did, in fact. Even a certain section of Trump voters were looking in his direction. There's an anecdote that I heard around the time of the campaign, which I'll repeat here. It was when Sanders was still in the running for the Democratic primaries, and Trump had already basically won the Republican one. And you had a big Trump rally, thousands of people there, big screen, rock music, or the whole shebang, what you'd expect. And on the big screen you had a footage of Hillary Clinton speaking. And the response from the crowd was vitriol, shouting, hissing, screaming, the kind of hatred that Trump supporters showed towards Hillary throughout the whole campaign. And then a clip of Sanders came on. Sanders, of course, running for Democratic primary on a very different programme to Trump. And instead of that, you didn't quite get cheering, but you did have this begrudging silence, this kind of slightly respectful, we're not sure what to think about this guy, because you cannot accuse Bernie Sanders of being the Wall Street candidate or crooked Sanders. Those epithets simply don't make sense. Now, in France, it's an interesting fact that the FN, Front National, one of the reasons why it's gained such a big mass base over the last decade, basically, or a bit more than that, is because it's been eating up into formerly communist areas, as in voting for the Communist Party. Working class areas that, again, have felt completely abandoned by, they use the language of globalisation, effectively talking about global capital, the deindustrialisation you've had in some areas, and the feeling that the whole of politics and society is run by a completely alien elite that doesn't act in their interests. And the communists, to their shame, have had nothing to say about it for all this time. I mean, there's a running theme in all of these elections, which is the kind of the failure of the centre-left and the social democracies. And they're paying for it. In France in particular, the Socialist Party was in government. And it's paid for it, and its austerity programme, having been elected on an anti-austerity programme, is paying for it by having their candidate get smashed in the presidential election. And now, from what I understand, the party itself has split about 3 ways, and I would be very, very surprised if it did well in the legislative election. We're looking at the Pasocification, that's a hard word to say, the Greek disease, if you like, of the French Socialist Party, and deservedly so. The Communist Party has been impotent throughout its entire proceedings. Meanwhile, the right is building. There's a link between these two things. But the candidacy of Jean-Luc Mélenchon cut across that to an extent. Clearly, he didn't eliminate the Front National presidential campaign. But he got 19%. He came within a whisker of actually being in that second round. And I think if he got to that second round, there was a very good chance he could have won it. As it happens, actually, if all the people who voted for the new anti-capitalist party, and I forget the name of the other party, it was the Trotskyist party, who also stood a candidate, if the roughly 3%, I think, of people who voted for those candidates had voted for Mélenchon, he would have got to the second round. That's a contingent factor, but what this shows is that this idea that being kind of anti-establishment left and being a far-left candidate is so unpalatable to the public you could never do well, it explodes that idea. And I don't think it's just because of French conditions and French history. I think it's something that Corbyn could emulate. And one of the ways he could emulate it is by copying some of the campaign techniques and some of the messages that Mélenchon so successfully deployed. For example, Mélenchon was having huge rallies, not just of a few thousand, but over 100,000 in one case in Paris.